What's the dumbest reason people called 911? Story 1. 911 dispatcher here. The dumbest reason is to ask about the weather, ask about internet outages, etc. You would not believe the number of people that call 911 just to have a conversation and tell you about what's going on in their lives. Answer: I just wish they'd make the non-emergency lines easier to find. Also, my favorite was when there were teenagers, potentially adults, actively vandalizing a large porta potty, trying to tip it for a public trail. And when we called, we got bounced between departments because they couldn't agree on who had to deal with it. Each time the department blamed us for contacting the wrong people, even though the three of them have a shared number listed for their non-emergency number, and we didn't get to choose who we got. They transferred us. I finally just said, well, this is happening. I told you so. I did my part. Up to you if you do anything about it. Story 2. I called 911 in the UK when tipsy to make a point. It was the wrong number. Ours is 999. Anyway, turns out it redirects to 999. Answer: another accidental call story I have, which is also funny. I had jeans that would somehow activate my phone and start dialing people from my pocket. Well, on this occasion, they'd managed to dial 9999999999999 and a bunch of other random numbers, which apparently also calls 999. I had been cooking, and I often sing while I'm doing household tasks and stuff. The call had been active for over 3 minutes when I looked at my history to be surprised to see 999 there. They would have heard me singing Desperado and wondered WTF was happening, then hung up. Luckily, nothing was sent out. Story 3. My brother called when he was 5 to say hello to the police officers. No one at home knew he did it, and he couldn't explain why he called, so they sent a unit over. He was over the moon. My mom was livid. Answer: this brings back memories. My brother did that on his 2nd or 3rd birthday after learning about 911 from daycare. Officer showed up, and my mom realized what happened, explained it was the youngest, and asked him to please wait at the door. She called my brother over and told him, "Hey, someone is here to see you. Answer the door." He opened it and immediately burst into tears because he became obsessed with the idea of calling after learning the number. So we told him he'd be arrested if he called, and it wasn't an emergency. He thought he was going to baby jail. 10-10 memory as an older sister. Story 4. One of my friends called 911 to report when she found out her boyfriend cheated on her. Sometimes people just don't know what to do after getting cheated on, LOL. Story 5. I once called the police because I saw someone beating the hell out of their dog, shoving it into a trash can, then walking away like it was nothing. It was one of those novelty giant teddy bears, and they were trying to make it fit in the bin. Story 6. I saw a video of a recorded call where some lady got in her car without her keys and locked the door. Not knowing how cars work or bothering to check first, she calls 911 and cries that she's locked herself inside her car. To the operator's defense, they were very polite and patient, calmed the lady down, and after a few confused questions, asked her to try pulling on the handle. The sound of them dying a little on the inside was quickly drowned out by the embarrassment of the caller as the door opens, and you can hear in her voice how foolish she feels. I'll have to see if I can find a link to the video and add it here. LOL, it's worth a listen. Story 7. I was out with a trio of guys that were all snow shoveling different homes. Towards the end, we started taking turns on who would go out to shovel so the other two could warm up and drink something. On one particular house, the only black member of our trio goes out and does the shoveling. He gets done, starts on his way over, and cop cars show up as he reaches us in the truck. Turns out the house we had to park in front of, the occupants had called that someone suspicious was in the neighborhood. We get out of our vehicle, explain things to the cops, they realize what's going on, and leave. With the job done, we left as well. It was ridiculous. Story 8. I know a child that prank called 911 like 5 times to order a pizza. The police went to her house to talk to her parents, LOL. Answer: when I was a kid, me and my friend were playing a game and would unplug the phone while doing so. I have no idea how, but my friend called 999 while the phone was unplugged, and it still rang them somehow. A cop came to the door and asked my friend's dad if he wanted us both arrested. He told the guy to fudge off and then was threatened with being arrested himself. Story 9. My stepdad called 911 when a raccoon got into our house. They advised him to open a door and wait for it to leave. Story 10. I was throwing a man out for getting belligerent. He was knocking shoot-off tables and screaming at employees. Walked up, started to put my gloves on and told him he had until I had them on to start walking to the door or I'd physically adult worker him out. It was mostly just a hand on his shoulder as we walked, just enough to keep him moving. He called 911 and told them I was raping him. Wanted me arrested for intimacy assault in public. Only time I've ever seen a 911 dispatcher hang up on someone. Story 11. Years ago, I knew a guy who called 911 because he was out of beer and was too tipsy to drive to the store and get more. He got a nice little visit from the popo over that one. Story 12. Personal fave of all time was the cop who called 911 because he and his GRF did some substances he stole off a suspect and got too high, so they started freaking out that they were dying. Story 13. Not dumb, but more like cute. My sister, school therapist, but also taught some classes, used to teach children how to dial 911, what to say, etc., and would explain to only call for emergencies. Well, the kids went home that night and practiced, not a lot of them. The next day, she had a visit from a very nice police officer at the school. She decided to let the local police and 911 call center know ahead of time when she was going to do that lesson next year. She still did that lesson for many years, but always gave them a heads up. Some of the dispatchers had a nice discussion with the kids. Story 14. There was a squirrel in the road, not dead, just playing. A car didn't want to run it over and didn't get close enough for the squirrel to move. They called 911 so the cops could get the squirrel into a tree. I lived in a small town with a hilarious police blotter of all the dumbest 911 calls made by the fancy people of the town. Another one was someone saw a real witch walking around. It was a girl dressed in black clothes and a cape. The caller was convinced this girl was a witch and coming to curse the town. There were so many other funny ones, but I forget now. Story 15. I remember reading somewhat recently that someone called 911 at drive-thru because they had a problem with their order and the restaurant wasn't doing anything about it. Story 16. Need cigarettes. I'm trapped in my car, not tipsy, just did not realize they had locked the doors. House key is stuck in lock. Tipsy, not their house. Wind is causing tree branch to tap my window. Sober, old, annoyed. Wanted FD to page out to trim tree. Car stolen from hotel parking lot. Sober, stupid. Flew into town, took cab from airport to hotel. Need condoms. Multiple calls. Some sober, some not so sober. Story 17. My dad called 911 to report I was taking back the stuff he stole from me. That audio is already on YouTube. My sister released it to prove that I was the bad guy. It didn't go the way they imagined. Story 18. In my town, a group of individuals reported seeing a ghost and contacted the police for assistance. However, no ghost was found. Story 19. My husband is an officer, and one of my favorites he told me about was a phone call from a perfectly able-bodied young adult who didn't want to wait for the city bus and was requesting a ride to her friend's house. Story 20. I called the non-emergency line because my Amazon package was thrown into someone's gated property, and I had just moved to town and didn't want a trespass charge for hopping over their gate. I couldn't stop laughing while trying to explain to the dispatcher why I was calling because it was so dumb. I apologized profusely to the cop who showed up, and he was like, "No, yeah, it was probably a good idea," and hopped their fence to give it to me. I felt so bad. Nice guy, though. Story 21. When I was 14, I worked at an old-fashioned soda fountains sandwich shop, pharmacy. One day, a lady came in for a malt and an egg salad sandwich. She was a 911 dispatcher. She was telling me about a lady who called every single day to ask what day it was, what time it was, and what the weather was. I told her to give the lady our number. Mary Meme called us every single day, sometimes a couple times a day, asking those questions. The dispatcher asked that I call her if Mimi ever skipped a day, and we didn't hear from her. One day it hit me. I was 17, a whole shift without a call from Mimi. I called the retired dispatcher. We all went to Mime's funeral. Her elderly sister showed me the note she had stuck to her wall by the phone. My name, Tate Substances Store, the number, call every day, it's okay. Man, I lost my shoot. Sorry, this question reminded me of that. I am 41 now. I still wonder about the regulars. Did she ever finish beauty school? Was that really Alan Jackson's baby? Did he ever lose enough weight to buy a Harley? Was the blind guy really blind? Or did he just like me reading his mail out loud? Did the pharmacist John Jordan know how poor my family was, and that's why he offered young me the job and had his wife buy me pants and shoes? It's weird what sticks in your mind and what doesn't. Story 22. Technically, called the emergency line here in the UK once for a leaking pipe in the bathroom. The leak had gone onto the phone line. Yes, we still had one until about a month ago when they stopped doing them altogether, and it somehow called the emergency services. First we knew was when the police turned up at our place to check all was okay. By this time, the phone line had been disconnected. Still good to see they did turn up. Apologized profusely, let the police know all was okay, and they left it at that. Just glad they believe me. Also good to know they will turn up even when they are 99 sure it's a line fault. That one could mean the difference between life and passing for someone sometime. Story 23. In my province, with one of our major cable providers, 911 is the channel number for one of the sports channels. A senior accidentally dialed 911 when he confused his TV remote for his phone and was trying to watch the Canucks game. Story 24. Woman under house arrest called 911 to order cigarettes. She couldn't leave, ankle monitor, and was out and having withdrawal. It was an emergency that she get some cigs. Story 25. 911 folks do not drop calls asking for pizza, etc., because it might be someone secretly calling for help. Story 26. My ex is a paramedic. He was once called at 3 a.m. because someone couldn't feel their legs anymore. After he got the patient in the ambulance, he figured out the patient had fallen asleep on the commode and couldn't feel his legs after them turning numb from him sitting there too long. Story 27. Among the reasons I've personally encountered. 1. To discipline their children. It's past their bedtime and they aren't behaving, but they don't want to get too angry at them, so they want the police to come and scare the kids into going to bed while the parents save face. 2. An old lady pressed her fall detection alarm device. The alarm center tries to contact her, fails, then calls for an ambulance. Paramedics get there and she's having tea with her friend and says, "I told you they'd show up." 3. As a taxi service in Canada. Yes, you read that right, and it technically isn't illegal, but there are some workarounds. In Ontario, you get charged for an ambulance only if you're transported and it's done by the hospital. I've seen many cases where the person lived near the hospital and was out drinking. They say they want to go to the hospital because they're too tipsy, get a ride, then say the wait is too long so they don't want to register, which means they can't be billed for the ride. Then they say they live around the corner and they feel better so they're going to walk home. Cheaper than a taxi and cheaper than Uber. 4. To help them get any food item. It could be something like bringing the pizza Uber Eats in from out front, or helping grab their TV remote, vodka bottle, buttering a bun, making coffee, etc. This is often people who are so morbidly obese that they cannot walk, or they are so tipsy they want someone to do stuff for them. It occasionally is an extremely old person who shouldn't be home alone and is on a waiting list, but that's less often. 5. Because there is someone who looks like they need help, but they don't feel like checking on them and couldn't live with themselves if they didn't call. The number of times someone calls saying they think someone is dead, but they don't want to check out of fear or laziness is insane. There are times where the same homeless person sleeping in a park gets 10 calls in a day, and not one person is willing to check on them. Complete waste of resources. Sometimes the person is awake and they just look sad sitting in a park, and someone calls because they feel the person needs mental health support. A guy accidentally swallowed some of his own semen, I don't know how, and was worried it caused his upset stomach. The call taker reassured him that people have been swallowing semen for generations. Story 28. Former dispatcher here. Took a call from a woman asking that the county move the deer crossing sign from by her property. I asked if the sign was damaged, if there was something wrong that she needed the sign moved, and she replied, "It's so dangerous driving here with all these deer crossing the street here. Can you just move it down a mile or so they cross down there?" I politely responded that I'd make a note for the county, but highly doubted that they would move the sign. The sheer level of idiocy was shocking. Story 29. Had a small party in my backyard. No music, just 10 or so people hanging out. Cops showed up and asked why we were trying to eliminate the neighbor's dog. Huh? Apparently one of our guests threw a single bone from a chicken wing into the neighbor's yard over a fence. Rude and uncalled for, yes. But the neighbor called and said we were trying to assassinate his dogs. I went over to apologize and grab the bone, but the neighbor just stared at me through the window. Okay? The cops knew them well and just asked to try to avoid interacting or planning assassination attempts. Story 30. A story from a few years that a woman called 911 because McDonald's wouldn't fill her Chicken McNuggets order because they ran out. Story 31. When they don't get what they want from a fast food restaurant. Karen's about to get trespassed and she doesn't even know it. Story 32. Countless times you'll have psych patients calling the police because they think the police can get them out of the psych hospital. All it does is have police call us back to make sure the patient doesn't keep calling. Story 33. I want to say 8 or 9 or so, and at my grandparents' house. They had one of those VTech cell phones. Anyway, I got bored and wanted to test the phone. So I dialed 911, but added a bunch of random numbers at the end. So it looked like 911-4827-4020, because there was no way it would call 911, right? It did. And instead of explaining that it was a mistake or hell hanging up, I got scared and hid the phone underneath the couch. While the guy was on the line, I promptly forgot about it. However, as my parents were driving me home, we did see police cars going the opposite direction. Later that day, I accidentally called 911 again. I got a hold of my aunt's iPhone and got the password wrong too many times that it prompted me to the emergency number, and dialing anything calls the police, and my parents weren't too happy. They were even more pissed after my grandpa called and told them the police came to his house. Story 34. I was on a flight a couple of years ago where the aircraft had to go around due to low visibility and snow. Nothing dramatic, a bit bumpy, came back in and landed on the second attempt. An old lady a few rows ahead of me got her mobile phone out and called 112, local emergency number, to give them a heads up the plane was about to crash. Flight attendants noticed the phone and were not amused. Story 35. A fellow IT guy I worked with once accidentally called 911 at work. I was in my cube when I suddenly heard Carl apologizing and thought I heard a police radio. I peeked around the corner. Sure enough, 2 of the town's finest were chatting with him. Our manager came out of his office laughing and shaking his head while everyone, including the cops, had a good laugh at Carl's expense. Turns out Carl had been working on a 911 report. We were a telecom company and meant to call the person who wrote it. He zoned out and started dialing 911 instead of their extension. The moment he hit the second one, he realized what he'd done and hung up, thinking it didn't go through. But with 911, there's no delay. As soon as you dial, it's live. Confirmed by my mom, a retired dispatcher. The dispatcher treated it as a hang-up and sent officers to check it out. Carl got a friendly HR chat and the nickname Captain 911. Story 36. Lady wanted me to send officers to look for her dog that she let out in her fenced-in yard because it was taking longer than usual, and she had already taken her glasses off for the night. Man demanded we arrest the Schwann's truck driver for knocking on his door. Man was upset that his neighbor was flying the American flag upside down. Man needed help carrying a propane tank, but we actually found a meth lab during that call, so it wasn't totally dumb. Story 37. A person whom I told to stay off my property called the police on me when he came up to my home and knocked on my door. I answered and put a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber handgun to his head, told him he had 30 seconds to get off my land. He left and called the police. The police came, showed them the video, and they arrested him for trespassing. Dude was mad that they did not arrest me. Story 38. When I was a wee child, I called 911 to ask the operator how they were doing and how their day was. Very dumb. I got in tons of trouble afterwards. Story 39. My friend had a bad high and was absolutely convinced ghosts were going to come and get her, so she was texting everyone stressing about it. I got there as she was on the phone with 999 and explained to dispatcher that she had a sober adult with her now. Her pulse breathing, etc., were all normal, and I was going to make her eat some toast. Dispatcher gave me a few things to watch out for and said to call again if we needed to. Nice lady. Story 40. ICE agents called 911 last week to report that someone was trying to climb, open ramming the entrance to their detention center. When local PD arrives, there were only 2 ABC reporters that were setting up a camera on the sidewalk. No one even touched the doors. Broadview police chief says ICE agents making false 911 calls. As for a regular Joe, I've heard recordings of people calling 911 to report a McDonald's employee told them the ice cream machine was broken, and they really wanted an ice cream cone. Story 41. To complain about fast food orders like a messed up burger, there is not enough shrimp in their order, or a restaurant that isn't even opened yet. Story 42. I once had a guy call us, EMS, because he had terrible stomach pain and couldn't breathe. About a mile down the road, he asked us to stop and let him out. He was having a one-night stand and wanted to get out of it. Expensive way to ghost someone. Story 43. When I was 16, I climbed to the top of a mountain in the middle of the night, mostly because I was a manic and depressed idiot who didn't want to go home, and it was absolutely freezing and windy. I thought I was going to get hypothermia, LOL, and I called the police to come get me. And I got a free ride in a cop car, so that was kind of cool. Story 44. I called 911 for a dumb reason, but I was like in elementary days, pre-elementary days. I don't remember how old I was exactly, but my mom has told me this story, and I only vaguely remember it. But I was watching Titanic, and apparently I thought it was happening in real time. So I called 911 and told them it was sinking. My mom caught me and apologized to the operator, and I got in trouble, LOL. Story 45. Criminals in San Diego sometimes intend to call Mexico by using country code 011, and they fudge it up and call 911 instead. Story 46. They do a news story on the stupidest 999 calls of the year on the UK, and I still remember the one that called 999 because there was a hedgehog in her garden, and she was afraid of it. There's always someone calling G because they've been shortchanged or been handed an ice cream without sprinkles. Story 47. My husband is a firefighter. Early in his career, he got called to a frequent flyer, Lois. She was a 70 woman who would regularly tie herself to her bed spread-eagled naked and call for help. Story 48. 1. A lady called to complain that a homeless person asking for money wasn't grateful enough that she gave him money. Wanted the police to talk to him about how to be thankful. 2. A man called to report that his neighbor was cutting down a tree that was in that neighbor's yard. But the person calling liked the tree and wanted the police to stop him from cutting the tree down on his own property. 3. A woman claimed that someone broke into her home and left her a new cat, which turned out to be a ball of yarn. 4. All the ridiculous complaints about people not wearing a mask. My favorite was a man complaining that a woman and her child weren't wearing a mask on a nature trail. He said that he had COVID, so they needed a mask because he didn't want to wear one. I asked why he was out in public with COVID to start with, and not even wearing a mask. He hung up. Story 49. I work security for a college. We had a 911 scanner to know when emergency units were coming to campus, since their dispatch center isn't great at notifying us when something's going on. One night, I heard someone called because they smoked so much plant substance they can't open their eyes and lost it for 5 minutes. Story 50. A customer called 911 on me when I worked at a video store because I would not give her cash back, just store credit, on a DVD she was returning. She was yelling at me nonstop until the police arrived. When they finally showed up, they arrested her. Apparently, she had a habit of calling them for no reason. It was possibly the greatest moment of my 10-year career as a video store clerk. Story 51. I was dropping off a patient at the hospital, and as we're leaving, we get toned out to another call. Patient was pale, unresponsive, not breathing in a wheelchair outside. The call is a decent distance away too. Well, fudge. So we hit the lights and haul jerk. We get updates that the caller refuses to get any closer and see if the patient has a pulse. Fine, whatever. I get on scene as a fly car medic is rolling up behind me. My partner and I grab absolutely everything and go up to the patient. It was a fucking mannequin sitting in a wheelchair next to someone's house. Story 52. Paramedic here. Will you turn up my thermostat? It's too cold to get up from the couch. Might be my favorite. Story 53. I had an Airbnb try to charge me extra cash because I booked for one and brought a girl. I told them no. They called the cops. Cops did nothing, of course. Story 54. My favorite is the lady who called 911 to ask the cops that just left her place to come back because she thought one of them was cute and wanted to meet him again. Story 55. When I was little, I called 911 because I thought they would have my grandma's phone number so I could call her to say, "Happy birthday, LOL." Story 56. Hotel front desk worker here. Karen once called the police because I, a white woman, was racially discriminating against her, also a white woman, because I wouldn't take her room service order at midnight. We only have room service from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Story 57. I used to work in an ER, non-medical, and saw this one go down firsthand. Get notified by nursing staff a rescue is being brought in for chest pain. My coworker is already prepared to get patient info from the truck crew, so I'm standing outside by the pedestrian door to watch them come in. Truck arrives a few minutes later, and they back in for drop-off. The doors open, and the patient walks out of the truck with rolling luggage. I'm standing there with a clear view of this thinking, this motherfucker does not have chest pain. As they're walking, I can hear them arguing with the truck crew. A couple minutes later, my coworker comes out of the ER, stating the guy doesn't want to be seen there. I was like, good. Immediately after that, the no longer patient then walks out of the ER and goes towards the waiting room. I'm now standing next to the security guard, watching the not patient pick up the phone on the wall and call a number. That's when I see the same truck crew that just dropped the not patient off, who hadn't even left yet, walk out of the ER, go straight to the waiting room and start yelling at this person that 911 is not an Uber. This idiot thought that if they called 911 again, they would be taken from my hospital to another one. The idiot then storms out through the pedestrian door and walks away, rolling luggage in tow. I've seen some wild shoot go down in that ER, but that was hands down the dumbest thing I have seen. Story 58. I knew cops back in Baltimore that would carry a small pellet pistol with them in their car. People would call 911 because of a rat in their home. This was back many years ago. Story 59. From the police log in my tiny hometown. Somebody once called to report that someone else had planted grass seed in their yard while they were away from home. On another occasion, somebody called because a man had kicked a school bus tire. It was unclear if the call was to handle the injury the guy probably sustained from doing that, or to settle whatever escalating argument had made him want to kick a school bus. Story 60. My old roommates got too baked and called the fire department because they thought the out-of-battery beeping of the carbon monoxide detector was the "there's carbon monoxide present" beeping of an actual emergency. They came to our house, fire engine and all, smelled what was going on, promptly told them to get new batteries for the detector, and then left. Homie firemen. The only reason I wasn't one of the idiots with them is because I had an exam the next day and was cramming at the library. Story 61. A colleague was late for work because he had to call the police as there was a seagull in his back garden, and he found it distracting. Utterly absurd. Story 62. I read a story in the news about a policeman who stole special brownies from work and brought home to his wife. Neither one of them had ever tried pot before, and instead of having a small nibble to see what happened, they ate several brownies each. They started freaking out, and the policeman called 911 for help. Story 63. I always think back to the off-duty cop back in 2007 who called 911 after baking and eating some pot brownies with his wife. They thought they were really dying. Story 64. I used to answer police calls, and on my first ever call when I started training, this lady rang 999 to report that her 7-year-old son had been shaking pears off a pear tree, and the owner of the tree had come outside and forced the kid to eat all the pears that had come off. The only response I could come up, even my mentor didn't really know what to say, with was, "So how many pears did he actually eat?" She had the nerve to sound surprised that I had asked. The answer was 2 or 3, before she had intervened and called the police. Story 65. My ex wouldn't give back my rabbit. He called the police on me for a welfare check. I was at my home, had been at my home, and had texted him kindly asking when I could get or he could bring my rabbit. The police told him to give her back and stop harassing me. Story 66. Retired dispatcher. Had a guy call multiple times because he couldn't maintain an arousal. He couldn't because he had been doing meth all night. After 4 or 5 calls and as many warnings, sent officers to discuss misuse of 911. He got arrested for possession and misuse of 911. Story 67. I saw a guy break into a car, took video of it, called 911. They told me to call 311. PD don't give a fudge. Story 68. Former dispatcher here. I once had someone call in because there were squirrels in her attic. Animal control didn't do anything, so she called the police. She insisted again and again that she needed PD to come out and handle it. I finally had to send a sergeant to her house to explain that the police don't have any squirrel catching apparatus in their issued equipment. Story 69. We recently had 11 cop cars rock up to our house due to a gun report. We're in Australia, so it's a big deal here. Turns out someone driving past saw the bright green Nerf gun my son was playing with and thought it was real. Story 70. Friend of mine is a 911 operator, and stupidest call she ever got was because the caller was missing ketchup in the bag of food he ordered from Burger King drive-thru. Story 71. IDK if anyone remembers, but when YouTube went down for a while that one time, people were calling 911 to complain LOL. Story 72. I called 911 because I heard a prowler trying to get in my second-story window. Cops arrived, shined a spotlight up there, and it was my cat I'd accidentally locked out. Story 73. I was struggling to get home in the March snow. Yeah, no, that's not dumb. Elementary school. I pushed the red button in an elevator. Story 74. Lack of emotional regulation and conflict resolution skills when confronted with an incorrect order or misunderstanding at the Burger King drive-thru. Story 75. 5-year-old me was just taught to call 911 when something bad happened. I called 911 because my best friend walked home and I was upset. She lived like 3 houses down from us. Story 76. Mosquito bite. After I told him that it was in fact a mosquito bite, he shrugged his shoulders and said that he thought as much, but wanted to make a medical consultation to be sure. Threw me a granola bar to cheer me up because he said I looked pissed. Story 77. I saw a video here in the UK of a recorded 999 call. This old man called them because there was a rotting chicken in his fridge. He was scared to put it in the bin because putrid juices and rats germs, etc. So he wanted the police to turn up in a car and take it away. He even offered to pay for petrol. Story 78. I've heard of people calling the police because of UFO sightings. Never really understood why. It's not the kind of thing they usually waste their time with, or can even really do much about it. Although there was an interesting incident during the UFO wave in New Jersey, where local police tried using a drone to follow one of the UFOs out to sea, but it went too far out to keep following it. Story 79. I heard one once where a woman at McDonald's called because they wouldn't give her fries. I think she may have been inebriated at the time. Story 80. Patient in inpatient stroke rehab called 911 to have his back scratched. He hung up quickly and was quite surprised when the police strolled into his room. Story 81. U.S. citizen traveling abroad, not realizing that there are different emergency numbers outside the U.S. Story 82. A woman called 911 at a restaurant I frequent because her tuna melt contained fish. She was appalled that they dared to do that to her. She orders tuna melts all the time, and they aren't fish. The police did not come out. My best guess is she was mixing up tuna melt with patty melt. Story 83. When I was a kid, maybe 5, my dad was burning leaves in the backyard. My brother, same age, didn't realize that was an okay thing to do and called 911. House is on fire. Firefighters came and everything. Story 84. When I was a small child, my puppy got his head stuck under the garden gate. My mom and the neighbors were trying to get him out. She asked me to call my dad. I instead called 999. Thankfully, the operator was very kind to young me. Story 85. I once heard police get dispatched to a home where the caller was calling 911 to complain about being warned by the police to stop abusing the 911 line with frivolous 911 calls. Story 86. I'm an EMT, and one time someone called because they went for a run and their heart was beating fast. Don't worry, it slowed down back to normal when she finished. Story 87. I was like 8 years old and my family was moving into a new house. The moving truck ended up blocking the street at some point, and that was enough to make an old lady call the police on us. The issues are that the truck blocked the street for like 5 minutes. The lady didn't even say anything to us, or the movers either. She wasn't even in a car. She was watching us from her living room. It was a narrow, one-way street with sets of row houses, and each set had its own parking lot behind it, with access on each sides. So anyone who wanted to go through could simply enter a lot through one end, drive behind a set of houses, and drive back onto the street on the other end to avoid the truck, meaning we weren't actually blocking anyone whatsoever. Story 88. When I worked in a psych ward, patients would call 911 to report all sorts of false things. Sometimes it was just for entertainment, sometimes in hopes they'd be released. One day, a patient called multiple times. After the first call, they were banned from the phone for the day, but they got other patients to give them the phone. The police had to keep responding because the patient was reporting being held hostage, not being fed, and being abused. None of these things were true. I mean, they were on a 72-hour hold, but we certainly weren't harming them. Story 89. I work in law enforcement. One time dispatch got a call from someone because an ambulance driver flipped them off. I chuckled when they put that out over the air and figured that driver probably deserved getting the bird. Story 90. There's been a not zero amount of times when people have called 911 on the cops because they were getting arrested. Story 91. I'm a paramedic. I had an elderly woman call because someone drove by and their headlights woke her up and she couldn't go back to sleep. Also have had someone call for a toothache. They said we were taking too long, so they walked the block to the hospital. Mind you, we had to get out of bed, get dressed, and get in the ambulance. We have 2 minutes at night to get dressed and be en route. We're stationed 1.5 miles from the hospital. Story 92. Used to listen to the scanner when you still could. It happened several times. Mom wanted a cop to come over and yell at, scare their kid. Once it was the daughter came home with a detention from school. Once the daughter was refusing to put on her bicycle helmet for a ride. Once a son was refusing to get in the water for his swimming lesson because the water was too cold. Then there was a guy that was eating fried chicken from the grocery store in the ATM lobby of a bank at about 10 at night, and someone called for the cops. Cops came over and reported, no crime is being committed. Story 93. When I was 8, I was doing my homework at the coffee table and saw the house phone sitting there and thought, I wonder what would happen if I dialed 911 and hung up, lol. 4 hours later, a couple police officers showed up at our door while we were playing hide and seek as a family. My mom spun around and glared at me with a fury I'd never seen from her before. I was an idiot. Story 94. My nephew, 7, called to report that his house was on fire and his wife was inside. He's on the spectrum, and he was scripting. The 911 operator could hear my sister snoring loudly in the background and asked who was asleep, and he delightedly announces, my mama. Sometimes I imagine what the operator must have been thinking, hearing an obviously childish voice declare his wife was in a fire, while my sister snored away, oblivious. Obviously, they sent someone to check, but by that point, I think he had woken my sister up and she told the operator the whole thing. Story 95. I knew someone who called 911 because his t-shirt was missing and he thought someone stole it. He was also a hoarder. The police showed up and filed a report. Story 96. My mom worked in the call center for Yellowstone Park for about a year. She fielded a call for a stuck elevator. Turns out it was just slow. It reached the correct floor and opened while they were talking. A sick elk. It was lying on the ground and its ears were twitching. A loose golden retriever chasing the bison. It was a baby bison following its mama. And one woman in a state of panic because there were no streetlights and she had never seen true darkness before. Fun times. Story 97. Geez, I called one time because my crazy pants next door neighbors were at it again. Except this time I happened to look outside and he has her in a chokehold and was dragging her into the apartment. Story 98. People calling 911 while in the hospital, they are universally disappointed with the results. Lady called 911 BC she wanted to report a doctor who refused to give her IV pain medication. Elderly lady called BC she wanted a Coke and we were only offering her water. Older gentleman called saying we kidnapped him. Psych PT called saying we were blasting inaudible waves through him. Female in her 20s called requesting EMS transport to a different ER. BC ours was busy. She came in via EMS for a very obviously non-emergent complaint and was pissed when she was sent to the waiting room instead of an ER bed. Story 99. I knew someone who was banned from the ambulance service because they kept calling, claiming some ailment, and then trying to make the paramedics drive them home. The only thing that was ever wrong with them was they were tipsy and didn't want to pay for a taxi. Story 100. My neighbor saw me hosing down my paintball equipment one fine Saturday afternoon. Officer didn't even bother getting out of his car before starting in on the neighbor for wasting resources. That was the highlight of my interactions with police. Since then, they haven't done anything for assault battery with slurs in a church parking lot against me. Theft of a compound bow that would laugh at their Kevlar. They know who did it. Or my car getting totaled for someone pulling insurance fraud. Story 101. There was a bear in my yard and I called animal control to find out what I should do. I'm in a city. They told me to call 911. I felt so stupid telling the dispatcher why I was calling, and even stupider when police arrived at my house and said they weren't going to do anything. It was just walking around the neighborhood. My husband still teases me about when I called the cops on a bear. Story 102. Couple of friends were walking home from the bar. One got tired and lay down for a nap. The other kept walking and didn't realize. Sleepy dude eventually made it back, but the other guy got lost and called to ask them to come get him and take him home. They were kind enough to help him out. Story 103. I work in the emergency department. People have called 911 and brought to us for a STD check, staple removal, and stubbing their toes. Story 104. My little brother called 911 when he was around 4 or so because I was picking on him. I had no idea. Neither did my parents. Until A while later, we were outside when a police car arrived. My brother saw it and guiltily ran around behind the house. The police officer told my parents that someone had called, and when the dispatcher answered, all they could hear was breathing before the call disconnected. They quickly realized who was the culprit. Once my parents coaxed my brother out from hiding, the officer nicely explained that 911 was for emergencies and to not call the number if there wasn't. We still like to tease him about it 25 years later. Story 105. Dumbest call I've gotten was someone asking if we could go turn their hot tub heat back on because it was too cold to go out and do it themselves. Also get multiple a year with people asking to shovel their driveway and stuff. I'm sure there's been dumber, but those always stick with me. Story 106. I used to make edibles a lot, and I took some to a party one time. I guess they were a bit strong and this girl ate some and ended up calling 911 for an ambulance. Story 107. The lights went out in LA, I think it was in the 19-something the fudge, and people called the cops because they saw the night sky in all its glory for the first time. Story 108. A student at my school called 911 to complain that his teacher was mean. He legit thought the cops would come and arrest her. 5th grade by DW. Story 109. With my old phone years ago, I pocket dial 911 a lot and hear them come in on my headphones. It happens so much, they just stopped taking my calls. Story 110. We had a guy who was on an involuntary hold as well as going through adult beverage detox, and he called 911 because we kidnapped him. And then he called a very famous lawyer in the area who had a very simple phone number to say that we were kidnapping him and trying to eliminate him. And it was a shift and a half, man. Story 111. Change the channel. A lot. County finally forced the family to find placement for the patient. They were calling near daily. Another one called my friend the cop. BC her dealer ripped her off. Story 112. I was a young kid, probably 4 or 5, and my dad worked at the fire department. I missed him and decided to call 911 to talk to him. My mom was pissed. Story 113. A friend touched plastic melted from bug spray leaking onto it while high. Called 911 because they thought they touched battery acid, but was actually just having the worst panic attack of their life. Story 114. Former 911 dispatcher here. So many dumb calls. But my most ridiculous call was right as I was walking through the door. I hadn't even sat down yet, and someone called 911 to ask for Al Sharpton's phone number. I did not have the energy to start that darn shift. Story 115. The most annoying was when this guy called 911 because his toe hurt, and it wasn't gout pain, which I can sort of sympathize with. Nope, it just hurt a bit, and he thought if he went by ambulance, he'd get right into the ER. I rolled his jerk straight to the waiting room. Another stupid one was when this kid got caught jerking off by his mom. He started to fake a seizure. I get it. Your kid is shaking and saying, "I'm having a seizure." But if you know, people can't talk when they're having a seizure. Lastly, from what I remember being stupid reasons to call 911, this guy was tired of waiting in the waiting room since the emergency room is based on triage, so the more life-threatening problems get priority over the small stuff, and he decided to walk across the street to call 911. We had to pick him up, drive him back across the street, and the triage nurse sent him to, you guessed it, the waiting room. Story 116. I work in homeless services, and I used to have a client with a pretty severe mental illness who learned to call 911 whenever he was hungry. Because he had multiple severe health conditions, they had to transport him to the ER every time EMTs assessed him if he said he wanted to go. At one point during COVID, I had a staff person following him around the shelter with sandwiches just to keep him from calling 911 and breaking quarantine. Story 117. I called when my dog chewed through an extension cord. I was panicking and didn't think about it until they were like, "Ma'am, did you say your dog was electrocuted?" They were super nice about it though and offered to help me find an emergency vet. Dog ended up totally fine. Story 118. Advanced life support, EMS field provider for a municipality. Here's a list of dumb chief complaints. I have a yeast infection and the clinic isn't open until morning. I think I might have a bug in my ear from last night, but I'm not sure. I've had this rash for a month and don't know what to do. My doctor called and said my labs were abnormal and to schedule a checkup. I have an appointment at the clinic at the hospital, and the taxi that I scheduled didn't come. I have an appointment today at a far, far away hospital. I didn't want to pay for the taxi there. Take me to the far, far away hospital, please, for my appointment. My dad got discharged from adult beverage rehab today, and he somehow came home tipsy. She just broke up with her boyfriend and is hyperventilating. Your patient is the naked male on a bicycle. No, we don't know what's wrong with him. If anything, he's just naked riding a bike and someone called it in. He just waved at them, if that matters. My kid's finger is stuck in the top of the container of wet wipes. I used to get angry about it, sometimes amused, but often angry. I was especially angry when while we were transporting the yeast infection patient, there was a bad motor vehicle accident on the highway with entrapment, and we couldn't respond as the closest unit because we already had a patient using us as a taxi to the hospital. At some point, I got over it. I stopped making fun of it or getting angry for why they called. 911 is what it is. No one calls 911, no matter for the reason, when they are having a good day. People call 911 on their subjective worst days. 911 is a backstop, a last chance for people on their worst days to hopefully get them course corrected and saved when they're worried and everything else is going wrong. 911 is the opposite of natural selection, stopping some of the weakest from dying. Operating a 911 system is an act of mercy and love by a society. Instead of getting angry or cynical, in my last year working as a first responder, I did fire, EMS, hazmat, tech rescue. I decided to give them a little grace. I realized it's a complete social and economic system failure when someone with a yeast infection doesn't know what to do and has to call 911 as the solution. Where was this woman's parents or family to teach her when she was younger? Where was her access to health care? Where was her access to a regular pharmacy? Why was the only fix to her problem to call 911? The woman who called because her cab didn't show for her appointment? I later realized it's because we have a chute system to get less mobile, disadvantaged patients to the appointments they legitimately, medically need to keep them healthy. We need to remove barriers to care, not rely on ambulances to figure it out. When those patients don't see the doctor, they get sicker. As an EMS provider, I'm then getting them as legitimate 911 patients that could die without intervention. When they call, I am using my skills by intubating for severe respiratory distress due to CHF and putting on pre-hospital CPAP, etc., etc. But it didn't have to be that way. I got to use my skills, but we as a healthcare system in a fudge country should have done so much better by this person. That patient is probably costing the system and country 100x what it should have if she had just seen her doc originally and gotten her care monitored, adjusted. At the end, I realized, you call, I haul, that's all. Move on to the next one. While I could make light forever of the funny 911 calls, I dislike talking about the traumatic ones. Take down infants. I've done CPR under a Christmas tree, SMH. Through odd circumstances of fate, despite hundreds of miles of distance, I had a fatal overdose of a woman I play with as a kid. Save what you can, accept what you can't. Hang it up at the end of the day. Story 119. My caller wanted the phone number for Mississippi Fish and Game. He claimed our non-emergency didn't work. He dialed it wrong. We were in Kansas. Story 120. I think when I was 5 or 6, I called 911 to ask for help with my homework because my mom had said it was the number to call when you need help. My mom was a few feet away and was mortified when she noticed. She was cooking dinner. I was at the table. I remember them being in kind, and I think they actually were going to help. But my mom noticed I was on the phone, asked who I called, and rushed over to apologize to them when I said it was 911. Story 121. A frequent dumb one I've seen is to scare their partner or teach them a lesson. Using the cops to adjudicate relationship problems never ends well and is a form of abuse in its own right. Story 122. In 4th grade, I was home alone because I was skipping the summer program just down the street that I was supposed to go to. So of course I'm watching MTV and decided to clean my ears. The end of the Q-tip breaks off in my ear. My uncultured jerk probably didn't even know what tweezers were back then, and I panicked and called 911. They showed up, pulled it out with tweezers, and I got a massive punishment for skipping and being a doofus. Story 123. I responded to a call for a home care nurse who was unable to unscrew the IV tubing from their patient's IV. one small suburb, so got a full lights and sirens ambulance fire engine response. There was nothing wrong with the tubing, so we unscrewed it and were on our way. I've read Christmas is the biggest day for 911 calls because it's the only number you can call without a phone plan, and people want to try out their new phones. Story 124. Someone almost called 911 on my old school for having us run the mile in 95F, which for my area isn't even the worst it's been. Story 125. When I was around 6 in the 80s, we had recently learned in school about 911 and were given a sticker with the number to put on our phone. I was helping my mom with some yard work when the old rake she was using gave her a humongous splinter in her hand. When I saw it, I freaked out and ran into the house to call 911 because surely this was an emergency. She didn't realize what I was doing at first, so I did manage to call them before she caught up. They were good sports, though. Story 126. 911 dispatcher here. I got a call because the guy had a mosquito in his eyes. Also got a call because one other guy wanted an ambulance for his father because he can't stop calling me. Story 127. I called 911 once because my friend's dog was unresponsive. I asked them to send an ambulance to take him to the emergency vet. They said they don't do that. The dog died of a heat stroke, unfortunately. Story 128. Didn't Boy George call it, the British equivalent, .999, to complain that someone stole his cocaine, and then the police came and arrested him for cocaine? Story 129. People will call 911 over their order being wrong, but ignore an actual car crash right in front of them. Story 130. One of the best I've seen on Reddit from a long time ago was a lady calling 911 from a McDonald's drive-thru because they were out of chicken nuggets. Story 131. When I was about 6, I dialed my neighbor's house to see if my friend wanted to play with me. Their number started in 991. I accidentally dialed 911. Dispatch answered and I said, "It's okay. It was an accident." Cops showed up to talk to me and tell me how important it is to only call 911 in an emergency. I cried, LOL. Story 132. I don't think mine was bad, but when I was first starting to deal with my chronic pain, I was in so much pain constantly that I just didn't know what to do. But my parents were sick of taking me to the hospital. Understandable, I was tired of going to the hospital. But there was some hope in me that the doctors would do something, so I kept calling 911. Eventually, a paramedic noticed me as a repeat offender or something and compared me to my face as the boy who cried wolf.